Well, Ariel, I am excited to have you back on the pod. It has been a minute, but always great to have a returning guest. So thank you for taking some time to come on.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be back.
Well, it's my pleasure. And to kick it off, one thing I wanted to chat about is you mentioned you had a friend who's spending more time in the metaverse, and I know in my job I spend all day staring at a computer screen for pretty much everything I do. And it cracks me up that it's essentially how we put food on the table. You know, hunter gatherers had to go out and actually hunt animals, and now to essentially put food on the table, we not everyone. There's obviously a lot of people who don't have a job staring at a computer screen, but it seems like more and more people in the modern day economy are staring at a computer screen all day. So I kind of wanted to ask why, or what are the implications for society as more and more people just stare at a screen all day?
Yeah, so I'll give an example with that friend, right? Again, we're not naming names, we're not going to go into too much of detail, but this friend I feel like is a very extreme example of what's kind of now starting to develop with what we just said, or like with what you just said, with technology becoming such an essential part of like our day to day, our jobs, everything that we do, our money, everything. Um, so for this person, what he ended up doing for the past like 3 months. I actually haven't heard from him in the past 3 weeks, but in the past 3 months, from my understanding, he has been living in virtual reality full time. And so what that means is that he's wearing a pair of VR goggles, and he is making his money through the metaverse, which then enables him to go and buy uh, DoorDash, again, still through his virtual reality goggles, send them to his door, still be able to pay his bills, do all of that stuff. But he is literally only functioning within the metaverse. And from what he said, like, he doesn't even take off his goggles when he eats. Um, so he's
How does he not like spill food all over himself? Can you
I
like
think
toggle it
it's
so
just
you can see? And
nature. Yeah, it's like
that's kind of wild.
it's insane. Yeah, where like you can still see what's in front of you,
Oh
but
man.
then at the same time, like you are still within the metaverse. Like you are still your avatar, and I guess he's made his avatar look like himself, but like way younger, and like he's just that's how he takes Zoom meetings now too, because he still has like a company and runs a job as well on the side, but like it's all digital. Um, and so it's just really interesting, and it's at the same time a little unfortunate because this person, they haven't left their house in 3 months, and like it's kind of made them just stagnant in where they are because there's no need to leave, because you see nature in the metaverse, you see all the things that you would actually see and experience outside through virtual reality. So I guess in general, like this is becoming a Wall-E society. And when I say that, I'm referencing actually like Wall-E the movie, where people are living within their chairs, they're functioning and experiencing all the things that come with life, but not through actual sensory interaction, just through visual interaction and audio. So I don't know.
Did they take the glasses off to sleep?
I don't know that. I've never spent time long enough to be able to see. I would hope not. I feel like there would probably start to become issues with like a permanent face mark after that long of time. But again, I don't know. I all I know is that they've just chosen this as their own reality, and it's much easier. They sell real estate within the metaverse. They get to do whatever they want, make their own house, make their own life, and like it's much more functional to them than what actual reality is.
Yeah, to each I think there are some exciting things that can be built with that technology, but on the other hand, that sounds terrifying. Us all living in a pod, getting our DoorDash credits and just not getting outside. Also, I mean, for my job, I have to stare at a computer all the time. But even then, like my eyes hurt, and I try to wear the blue light blockers, and it helps a bit. Just like staring at that much blue light, no one can convince me that that is good for you. And it's definitely alarming that at an increasing rate we are just being so attracted to these screens. And I forget where I heard it, but someone was talking about how these algorithms are just so fine tuned to, go to the lowest part of our brainstem and just keep feeding us dopamine and keep us scrolling. And it is insane that some of the brightest minds in the world are, tinkering in the back end to figure out how they can adjust an algorithm to keep us that much more addicted, to get us to click, 0.1 more percent. And I don't really fault the people, because it's like that Charlie Munger quote, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. But at the same time, I think so many bright individuals are, because that's where the money is, or they're in finance optimizing an algorithm to get them, slightly better returns. A lot of very bright people are incentivized to build things that aren't necessarily beneficial, that lift all the it's like they say, a rising tide lifts all ships. And rather than that happening in society, I think there's many reasons for it, but we have incentives that skew people to go towards outcomes that are more zero sum than positive sum games.
Well, yeah, it's brain rot. We're thriving in a society of brain rot, and the thing is too is that to be able to even spread information now, you have to, like, I watched a TikTok earlier today where this brand content manager was talking about how now for any type of information to be accurately and like successfully translated through social media, you can't tell a story even anymore. Like 90 seconds is way too long. You have 3 seconds. And so everything now is all about like to get information out there, to get an understanding. Like you said, the smartest people in the world, they can't communicate to the general public through social media or through these different platforms unless they're now trying to hone in on like a vibe or an aesthetic that's pleasing to the eye within 3 seconds and to your ears, rather than this information is factual, this is what you need to know, it's very important, and like here's why. People seem to be less and less compelled to want to listen to that.
Yeah, it's amazing how powerful memes have become. I mean, I literally have a meme on my shirt with the Pepe, and it is crazy how, they say like if a picture can tell 1,000 words, or whatever the quote is, a meme, it can just like express an idea so much better. And it is funny, we're just sitting there scrolling, and you can tell a good meme when someone exhales loudly from their nostrils because it made them laugh. But I mean, to your point, that's how people are expressing ideas now. And I like reading books. I think there's a lot of value in reading books, but it's very hard to overcome that. When you like start reading, you got to kind of overcome that resistance to get that dopamine flowing. And then once you get into a good book, it's fantastic. But because of social media, you can get that. You can start getting that dopamine drip without having to push through any resistance, without having to overcome, any barriers other than popping out your phone. And as a result, I think it makes it a lot harder to do other activities. And as you were mentioning, it literally rots your brain. It atrophies your brain. But unlike someone's body, where like, look, if you sit inside all day and you're in the metaverse, not getting outside, you can quickly tell that person's body is probably unhealthy. But with someone's brain rotting, unless you have a conversation and you can just see they can't focus, they can't have a conversation, they can't, interact normally because they've had so much brain atrophy. It's just so much harder to see that than someone's physical appearance. So I think there's a lot of that. It just doesn't. It's not so prominent. We don't see it as much unless you interact with these people. And obviously, I'm guilty myself. I scroll Twitter all the time, and I love it. But I do try and like remind myself, like this does atrophy my brain. It does make it harder to do those worthwhile things, like sit down and really read a book or really focus for long periods of time, because you can just open, your social media of choice and get that instant dopamine without any barrier, without any resistance. And that's very dangerous, and it doesn't seem to get talked about a lot.
No, it really doesn't. And it's even when you said Twitter, like I feel like people are less likely now to even read anything. Like they need, unless it's a meme, like you were saying. Like the first thing that I had heard about the Olympics and like who had won the 100-meter sprint, because I had missed it. It wasn't a news channel. It wasn't like anything. It was literally a meme. And so
Yes.
there's writing there, but I found that like so many youth, like they have no, I mean, there are some that will still read and like use Twitter or Threads, but I feel like that's why even Threads on Instagram hasn't been super successful, because our brains are so low that even to read rather than to just watch is more effort. And it's like creating such a challenge in any type of comprehension.
Yeah, that's so funny you say the Olympic things. Not that I'm a big follower of the Olympics, but like the only people I know are the ones who became huge memes, like the guy from Turkey shooting the gun. And
Yeah.
I didn't even know that, sharpshooting was a sport in the Olympics, but because of that meme of the guy who didn't have any stuff on, who got the silver medal, like it's literally the meme that was, well, let me know who that person was. But and then the breakdancer, because people were giving her a bunch of crap. But it is amazing though, like what an impact memes are having on the culture. On the positive side, though, I think it can help ideas spread much quicker and kind of like one of the things that makes me very bullish on Bitcoin. There's a lot of things, but just how good they are at meming stuff, and politics are fascinating because memes. Like it's crazy to think, like for example, Trump getting elected in 2016 was like a huge part simply because the meme, like he was just such a popular meme, and like that's mind blowing to think like memes are what won the election. But I'm like I'm pretty positive that that's like one of the largest I mean, I guess a rise in populism as well, but one of the largest reasons he won the election is simply because he was much more memeable than Hillary Clinton, who there weren't many memes made about her.
No, I mean 1,000%. The one thing that Trump, I will not one thing, but like one of the biggest things that I will say he is very just inherently talented at is he runs his own social media. like he
Yeah, Twitter won him that. I mean, him, but like Twitter is like a massive part in him winning that election in 2016.
big time, and even when he got I think it wasn't arrested, but it was like he got those charges in court. And there's like this famous tweet that he did that went all over social media where it was like
His
they got me
mugshot.
girls. Yeah, and
The
it was
mugshot.
the mugshot, and then him tweeting "They got me, girls," where it was just like he is so in touch with how to get people to just talk about him, and so it's really interesting how it does leak into politics. Because on the other side now you have like, not to get too political if we're not ready for that yet, but just on more of a objective, you have like the VP Tim Walz, who I've been seeing a lot of memes of him like standing next to Paul Bunyan and being like, "I'm the left," or like him holding a pig and being like, "Who is this man?" Like it's just very interesting how politics have taken memes into pushing out personalities as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, social made a video of him and Elon Musk like doing a dance, and it was like just AI. But it'll be very interesting to see though if he gets back on Twitter. And since they've brought in Kamala, it seems like it's amazing. Like just the sheer amount of like I don't know, gaslighting from politicians. Like it's stacking like things on the mainstream media. Like for example, there's in community notes is not perfect on Twitter, and obviously a lot of bots are used to try and game it. But for example, there was an article that came out by Axios, and it was talking about how Kamala was never the border czar. And then in the community notes, there was an article link that Axios wrote where they called her the border czar. And it's just amazing to see the amount of gaslighting and like just the lack of shame from some of these mainstream media publications who will just completely ignore any mean thing they wrote or just any like it's like obviously they don't do this, but journalism is supposed to be holding truth to power and whatever is power to truth, and it just feels like not everyone's woken up, but it seems like more and more people are waking up to the fact that like so much of the mainstream media is just completely, it's not there to actually hold power to account. It's just there to gaslight and spread a narrative, and it's amazing how everyone will just step in line. And I mean, I got to commend the left on that. Like their messaging, it doesn't matter if it's a lie or not. They get behind the message and they just they nail that point home.
They run with it. No, but I think also one thing that's interesting about the left, but also the right, with either party, is that they'll have that one message, and then there will be 7 more messages that are all the same message, but in a very different light, because I feel like the younger generation now doesn't like to be fluid with what's already is. Like it's generation none is what some research studies are calling them. where they like to like fight back, but then say the exact same thing in just different ways. So it's very interesting how really at the end of the day though, that narrative or like headline that's being pushed is really what is consumed, and that's just being pushed out in different verbiage. But it's a weird. There's not a lot of questioning, like actual questioning.
Yeah, I'm curious. What do you think? Do you think RFK is going to pull votes from the left or the right? And I guess to frame that question a little better, it seems like the left is so good at getting that message on point. And then, the left used to be the party of free speech and anti-war. And I don't know what changed, but essentially, like, now they're all for war. Now they're pro-censorship. And there's still a bunch of neocons on the right. But, for all Trump's faults, he did try and pull us out of wars, try and slow down the industrial war machine or the military industrial complex. But the problem with the right is you still have some of those like neocons who are just as eager, if not more eager, to go to war as some of the people on the left. But then you have kind of, I don't know if you call it like a populist or an America First movement who is trying to, freedom of speech, not go to war, being isolationist, not getting involved unless someone attacks us. And because of those fractions, you essentially have like a much harder time, I'd say, right now on the right, and maybe this will change in the future. It seems like the parties always go back and forth. Like, for example, the Republicans under Lincoln, they were the party that ended slavery. And then obviously the civil rights movement seemed to be, I guess, pushed forward by Democrats and JFK. So I look at a candidate like RFK, and obviously he's, a Kennedy Democrat, as he likes to call himself, a liberal, but he is, anti-censorship, anti-war, etc. And I guess if, I don't think you can look at politics on like a left and right. I think it's much more dynamic than that. It's just unfortunate we live in a situation where it's like you basically have to be Republican or Democrat to get elected. But I look at a guy like RFK who wanted to run as a Democrat, who obviously was kicked out of the process. I mean, that's the most mind-blowing part about the gaslighting with Kamala is like no one democratically voted for her. They basically ran a coup on Biden, had him announce his resignation via a tweet. And then he came out like 5 days later and, gave a talk. Like, that was the most bizarre way for a presidential candidate to drop out of a race, especially because we know that KGP, the White House press secretary, runs his Twitter account essentially. So putting that aside, I'm very curious to see what side you think RFK is going to pull votes from, because even though he's a Kennedy Democrat, if you will, it seems like a lot of, I guess, more people who are more independent or part of the America First movement who want to kind of cut down on just the pure size of the government. He seems more anti-establishment, and the America First, I guess, populist side of the Republicans seems to align with that, anti-establishment movement, whereas it seems like the left and a lot of the neocons on the right are super establishment. And as a result of that, I'm not so sure that Kennedy will pull more votes for the left, but actually I think he might be pulling more of the votes from the right.
Well, I guess, like, kind of like what you said, we live in a very polarized two-party system. And so when you have a third party come up, unfortunately, I feel like for the majority of either side, they realize that vote, or they have this conception that their vote isn't going to count if they vote for that third party. Them voting for that third party is basically just throwing your vote away, which is insane, because then how do we actually challenge change? How do we want to like reform society when we are stuck in this two-party system that's really extreme? I don't know actually which side will end up voting for him. I will say, like, I've actually seen him. He does very personal campaigns where, like, for example, we have a freeway in LA called the 405, and there's like a bridge that goes over, and sometimes he'll be there, like there's a huge sign that says vote for why can't I Kennedy, and and he's there waving. There are a few people with him there waving down at all the traffic. But I think the unfortunate thing is that for him, I don't know how many either Republican or Democrats are going to feel super compelled to be like, okay, you've driven enough change where I feel like you actually have a chance where my vote could count.
Yeah, no, it does. I wonder if he'll drop out. I know WAPA ran that article, and then he debunked it, and I mean, I don't think he did, but it's not totally clear if he like put out some feelers and Kamala rejected him. So then he said, I would never go with Kamala because she's ant. So I mean, I think he's right. I don't think Kamala is pro freedom of speech or what is it, anti-war. She does seem like a war hawk. But you know, you don't know what was going on in the back room if he like tried to put out some feelers and see if he could get a cabinet position. And I'm curious if he's going to do that with Trump as well. And I haven't finished it, but I did read some of his book, The Real Anthony Fauci. And there's a lot of people who just, you know, spout the mainstream narrative. Oh, he's a nut, brain rot, brain worms, etc. But it is terrifying, some of the stuff in that book and just the misalignment of incentives and how willing Big Pharma and some of these other, I mean, organizations like the Gates Foundation are to fund studies and then influence these studies to have a certain, you know, make sure that their hypothesis is actually confirmed by giving the wrong amount of dosage or whatever it is. And then you find out the reason for, you know, suppressing ivermectin, and then obviously CNN and all these mainstream outlets for, you know, all in alignment saying, oh, it's horse dewormer. You realize because under emergency use authorization, you can't have any alternatives to the one thing. So without emergency use authorization, they would have had to pull the good old shot from basically all these places. So they like fund these studies that aren't the case. So I say all that because I would love to see, like, I mean, who knows who gets elected, but it would be great to see RFK try and get in there and just dismantle some of the bureaucracy and fight back against some of these institutions, which I'm sure a lot of people in there mean well, you know, they want to do right. But then I think you probably do have some people, some malevolent people at the top who are more interested in maintaining their power and status quo than actually helping people like they should be in a position like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a few things that I want to address with everything you just said there, where it's like, firstly, for the people at the top, like, for example, that whole PR stunt where Biden dropped out, and like you said, like, it wasn't even a vote. Like, no one chose to have Kamala. It was all a planned strategy where it was, okay, like, we know probably that whoever the Democrats are going to choose, it's not going to be her. And so, like, this just aligns.
That's why I say the left is so good at, like, because, like, they were, I mean, she was, like, worst VP in history, like, just historically bad poll ratings. I mean, not that I follow it that closely, but, like, that's all I saw on my feeds. And then all of a sudden, it's like, Kamala is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Like, everyone get behind her. And very few people on the left, besides, like, the few independent-minded ones, like, the vast majority of people on the left are just like, yeah, we're rolling with Kamala. Like, never Trump. That's, you know, Kamala's the greatest. And just no democratic process. They absolutely bumped Kennedy out. They didn't even, like, have a primary or anything. It's just like, yeah, she's taking the role. Deal with it. And everyone was like, yeah, I mean, thank God, you know, she's great. It's just like...
Because you have Trump on one side where you know everything about him. Like, everything under the sun, he makes very clear. Whereas Kamala's on the other side, you know nothing about her. Like, we know very little here and there. And even for Tim Walz, like, he seems like he's a very nice human. He used to be a social studies teacher, then went into politics, like, very warm and fuzzy. But for both of them, we don't know. We don't know much. Like, all we know is that they choose to be very quiet and behind the scenes. And so now it's just, what kind of politician do you want? The one that's quiet and nice, or the one that's loud and opinionated in a very, very, like, directed way? And so that's where it's like, that's where Kennedy probably got, like, lost in the sauce, because for him, he's, in a way, both of those things, but it's just not enough to compete against an extreme.
What's crazy too is with the Tim Walz pick, I was hearing Josh Shapiro was like, that's what everyone was suspecting. People were saying, oh, they're scrubbing his Wikipedia page, like all this stuff. And then this is someone's speculation. I don't remember who I heard saying this, but they were saying they thought Josh Shapiro was too high of an achiever and would undermine Kamala and make her look bad. So they picked like the biggest no name possible. And before this, I didn't know who Tim Walz was. The only meme I've been seeing of Tim Walz on X, or formerly Twitter, is that like the stolen valor thing, and there's like a clip of him going around saying he carried weapons of war in Iraq and he wants to ban those same weapons for citizens. But then people were saying he abandoned his platoon, and I don't know the specifics, but like if that is the case and he, you know, really did have stolen valor, he really was trying to claim he went to war when he dropped out. I mean, that is like I never served in the military, but I could imagine. I played a lot of sports, and like to have someone, you know, this is a much less, what's the word? this is a much lesser example because playing sports is a lot easier than war, even if you have to train all the time and go through a lot of adversity playing sports. In war, you could actually lose your life. So it's not exactly a perfect analogy. But I could see if someone's like, oh, yeah, I was on that football team. We won a championship. All the guys on that team, if they found out, would be like, the hell you were. Like, what is wrong with you? Why would you claim something like that? So in the case of, Tim Waltz, if the stolen valor claims are true, which again, I haven't looked too much into, but do seem to be true. It would be like that is such a horrible thing to fake.
Yeah, that would be, and that's also where it comes down to, like, for me and my algorithm, all I see are pictures of him with piggies looking really cute, him with puppies, him doing silly things that look so nice, and that's what my algorithm pushes. But then yours is pushing also, like, this whole other side of him that I'm sure half of America probably isn't seeing. Like, it's so interesting how it picks and chooses the information that then also frames our complete opinion on a candidate. And now I need to look into that because, yeah, I had no idea.
I think a feature on social media that would be so profound is if you could just like click on someone's profile and like obviously you couldn't see their message or anything, but if you could just like go and see their feed, it's like, you know what? I want to see what this person sees on a day-to-day basis. And you can kind of do that on Nostr, which is notes and other stuff transmitted by relay. You can take someone's public key. Obviously, everyone's public keys are totally available. You can put that into a client, which is just like the app you use to interact with the Nostr protocol. And then you can see someone's feed. But Nostr is still very small. And while I'm so bullish on that technology, it's not like you, like it'd be very interesting if I could go and pick whatever influencer and see what consumed their feed. And I think it would give people a much better understanding of what the other side is seeing. Because I know, for example, like my grandmother on my mom's side, she is a staunch Republican, watches Fox News all the time, and her sister, who is out in Oregon, is a staunch liberal, watches CNN all the time. And I mean, like they're not twins, but they're so similar as who they are as people. But when it comes to politics, they can't even talk with each other because the set of facts that are being presented is so completely different. And I do think kids are better at kind of discerning and wading through the BS, and the memes just give us information faster, if you will, and you can kind of discern it, and then you can have a conversation. And it's nice being able to, say, like, this is what I'm seeing on my feed. Like, I have not seen any of these pictures of Tim Waltz looking cute with animals. It's just been like, what a piece of shit, stolen valor, like, awful human being. And of course, like, the first reaction in my mind is like, yeah, that is a piece of shit move. But it's interesting that I think it's much easier to speak with people who are in younger generations who kind of have social media, and obviously our media is biased and our algorithm like tries to tune in and basically keep us as addicted as possible. But it also does help discern, and it really makes you wonder. Like, I don't know how much of what I know. Or I guess a better way of saying this is I realize that so much of the things I know, I'm not 100% sure that they're true, and it's just like the longer I live and the more I see, especially since 2020 and all the hysteria since the COVID pandemic, it's like it just really makes you question a lot of the things you just assumed were on solid ground, question the institutions, question what the media is telling us, and it's good on the one hand, but it's very unsettling, because I think unlearning something is oftentimes harder than learning something new, because you learn something and you kind of have that as your base. You don't want to unlearn something. I think we have a huge tendency to trust the first thing we learn, even if the first thing we learned is tremendously wrong.
No, I mean, there was a YouTuber who actually tested this unlearning theory, right? Where it's so hard to unlearn something. And he taught himself to unlearn how to ride a bike. And instead, he wanted to teach himself how to ride it backwards. Completely backwards. And so this man spent, I think a year and a half teaching himself how to unlearn and reintegrate this entire idea of the basic concept of riding a bike. But teaching his body, no, you have to recognize how to do it backwards. And so I feel like that in itself, where it's like something as simple as riding a bike, being so hard shows for something like our beliefs, or for something that we really hone our entire identity on, and what we base our morals on and things like that, when that comes crumbling and when you're trying to unlearn that and relearn something new, it makes it even harder, because then you're not only unlearning the basic concepts of what is, but it's what was the foundation of a lot of how you were acting in the world, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. So much of politics too, I think, is just divide and conquer strategy. If you can get people looped into these algorithms or looped into watching a certain thing, you make these people think the enemy is the other side. And I like the horseshoe theory argument where it's like, most people on the right and the left have way more in common than they think, but it's like the far right and the far left who are actually way more aligned than necessarily the people on the left and the right divide. And so often, people will look at the wrong. Going back to memes, people will look at the wrong. They'll be looking at the wrong enemy. And one of the most powerful memes I ever saw talking about politics is it was a guy in a MAGA hat and a woman with purple hair yelling at each other, and they were inside a fish tank. And outside the fish tank, you have like this fat cat banker smoking a cigar, laughing as the MAGA Republican and the blue-haired liberal are like fighting each other. And I just thought that was so profound. And I think in politics, you do see so much of that where the money at the top is trying to get people to fight with each other over the 1%, while meanwhile they're scraping up the 99%. And that's not to say, like, I firmly believe in capitalism. Like, I'd say much more aligned as an anarcho-capitalist than really any type of left-right Democrat Republican label. That said, anarcho-capitalism I don't think is perfect either. But I do believe in a system like that where, people are just ruthlessly competing with each other. You have all this creative destruction because monopolies are being destroyed and new companies are innovating. It's kind of like the analogy of a rising tide lifts all ships. And in the current system of politics, and you essentially have a central bank that can print money out of thin air. And America is definitely capitalist in many ways, but there's no central banks in capitalism. And as long as we have a central bank that can print money out of thin air and direct it where it sees fit, it can influence elections. It can influence almost every single aspect of society because money is arguably one of the most important, if not the most important technology we have for trading with each other, communicating prices, figuring stuff out. And when you have essentially one entity or one actor who's controlled by humans that has that ability to print money out of thin air, it just distorts so many things. And it's like, no wonder we see so much divisiveness in politics. And understandably, people are angry. It's just unfortunate because I think many people are directing that anger at the other side rather than trying to figure out, like, hey, I think most people are pretty sane in what they believe in. Sure, some people might believe in more or less taxes, but like the big issues of our day are our dollar being devalued at an insane rate by the Federal Reserve, not so much, what you think of X, Y, or Z political hot button that people bicker over all day.
No, it's completely true. Like, we live in what's so interesting, like you saying about the political sides really making it so that it's pointing fingers. It's that side or another, and it's a competition. Like, it's a competition for who's the best. There's no working together. Like, that even trickles down into the only foundation of actually giving back and like improving society that we have, which is like the nonprofit world or things like that, where even the government has created a structure where nonprofits or affordable housing or shelters or food banks have to compete against one another to even get funding from the government, and that's based on the party. And that's where it's just like, even the only thing that we have of giving back and doing good, it's a competition. Everything is a competition.
To your point too, the tax code, like, what was that famous debate where Trump was with Clinton, and I think that might have been the debate that really got Trump elected, and Clinton was like crapping on him for dodging his taxes, and he's like, what are you talking about? Like, that's just smart, and all of your donors do the exact same thing, and if you wanted, you would change the tax code, but you're not going to change the tax code because all of your donors use these exact same rules. And I think that's really, you might know better than me, you actually work for nonprofits, but you see like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they were mentioned in that real Anthony Fauci book, and that's supposed to be a not-for-profit, but these very wealthy people use their philanthropy in many ways to influence the things they want to influence, to get tax write-offs. And I don't necessarily know the solution, and I think philanthropy is great and going out and helping those less advantaged, but it does seem like rather than actually trying to have the most impact and really help people, a lot, and again, this is a generalization, so I'm sure it's not the case with everyone, but a lot of it is just the tax incentive to be able to basically donate your money to causes that you see fit, that you believe in, that you could then do stuff with that money rather than just paying your taxes like a normal person. And I don't necessarily fault, I think it just goes back to that Charlie Munger quote, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. But I'd love to hear, do you think having those tax rules has basically, I guess, corrupted some of the not-for-profit in many ways?
Oh, 1,000%. I can tell you from experience, because that's why I went from running a foundation that would give out money to fundraising for a foundation that needs to receive the money, because there are some great foundations out there that genuinely want to help and support and like just have really great founders, executive directors who have a really great process of helping people, like Unidos, or like that's like the national Latino foundation that's really like good and supportive for different organizations and groups. But then there are individuals like my previous boss slash trustee of my foundation that was specifically for animals who, for example, like didn't like animals, and like there are individuals who will take over organizations and who will create these foundations, don't enjoy the mission that they're actually helping, don't really care whatsoever about the impact that they have. All they care about is that tax write-off, saving money, not really being looked at by the government, and then on top of that being celebrated by celebrities and by people that, you know, are idols to them, so that's really their only main purpose, is like trying to climb that social ladder. And there are some bigger organizations right now too where similar things are happening, and it's all about the fame and the recognition. They have no actual want or desire to help the areas that they're working in. So it's, but there are some great ones. It's just there are also some horrific ones. It's sad.
Yeah, that last part you just made, I saw a tweet recently, and I mean, I don't know what the specifics were, but it was like Gavin Newsom doing a photo shoot, like picking up the trash in California. And, you know, I do wonder if like that is if he's being genuine, or if he's just trying to get the photo shoot, and I'm sure he's not the only one. And I wonder if I can find it. I'm going to share my screen real quick and see if I can find it. But I listened to a podcast with Balaji, who was the ex-CEO of Coinbase, and he was talking about bureaucracy and the homelessness budget in California. It was so insane. It's like he showed this chart, and let's see if I can find it with this perplexity search. But it was showing like that basically the budget's been increasing every year, and at the same time the amount of homelessness has been increasing every year. It's like the more money they throw at the problem, the worse the problem gets. I don't know if I can find this tweet from Balaji.
You know, they're not throwing money at the problem. Like, I work in affordable housing, and I can tell you that, I mean, we were supposed to get a grant from the city a year and a half ago. They still haven't even sent us an agreement, and it was for $450,000, whereas they just put $40 million last year into putting homeless people into motels. That was completely not permanent, not supporting actual permanent supportive housing, and it's just like a complete shit show. And the city doesn't do a great job. Like, I'm sorry, City of California, if you see this, but you're not doing a great job right now with actually integrating in the resources that are around and like that are actually working, and instead just creating new ideas and putting money into that, which never works.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, for all like the problems of just completely free markets, you essentially, at least you have a mechanism that basically says like, all right, no one values this service, you're going out of business. But when you can print money out of thin air and the government can I mean, the Federal Reserve is a private bank, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole, and you know, but essentially the Fed and the Treasury do work together to fund themselves. I mean, you don't have that function that says like, all right, no one is valuing the service, you have to get rid of it. You get stuff like this where, you know, you can see like the charts just going up and to the right, and the budget just increasing every time. And what incentive is there to stop this? Once you realize homeless budgets both inside and outside the state increase with the size of the homeless population, you see that the implicit incentives are to grow rather than to solve the issue. I mean, that point right there, to grow rather than to solve the issue. Curing an addict is like churn. It reduces their recurring revenue stream. I mean, that's so crazy to think like, to actually cure these people, to like try and help them get back on their feet and overcome their addictions, that is like eliminating a customer. And I mean, it's not the perfect analogy because, I mean, it's a pretty damn good analogy though, because like in essence, in a lot of ways, the customer is the homeless person who's stuck. And if I think the same thing could be said in hospitals, and it's not to say all doctors are bad because there's tons of great doctors out there, but if you actually solve people's underlying issues, well, then they don't have to come back so much. So a lot of the medical industrial complex, if you will, is incentivized to put a Band-Aid over people's issues rather than try and find the underlying root cause, so they keep coming back because that's more revenue for them. And I think money is a huge broken money is a huge part why these incentives are so misaligned.
I mean, it's it's substantially like it's just a huge problem. And like when you had said like the addict not getting help, right? Because that would just create a decrease in revenue. That is something that happens every day where we don't invest in mental health. We don't invest in rehab programs. We don't invest in things that actually will transform people because there's no profit from it. And like I can tell you from experience and also from hearing stories from other affordable housing nonprofits, like when there's a mental health case that happens, the majority of the time, if you call the police and you say, hey, like, we really need to get them help, we need to get them support, like, we don't want them evicted, we just need to get some sort of secondary assistance, the police will just be like, no, like, we're not coming. We're not gonna come and help, like, figure it out. And that's because there's no resources. Like, there's nothing. We've chosen to invest all of the money into, again, makeup programs rather than genuine impact.
Yeah, I remember 2020. It was all like the defund the police, and the sad part about that is, I mean, it's very easy to look back with the benefit of hindsight and be like idiots, but in that time, like I think most people were saying that probably had good intentions. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a lot of them had bad intentions. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say the people with good intentions, yeah, those intentions might have been good, but the reality is most people who are impacted by that are the ones who cannot afford private security. And I remember I was golfing with Cuba in Massachusetts, and I remember it was just like old white dude smoking cigarettes. And he's just like, I can't tell you how many of these bleeps have like the Black Lives Matters defund the police sign in their yards. And then meanwhile, they have like right next to that sign is like private security secured by. And the reality is like defunding the police hurts the worst off in society, like the poorest people. And rather than helping them, defunding the police just makes many of their issues that much worse. Meanwhile, the people, not all, but like many of the people advocating for these policies could, you know, pay for the private security solutions that helped keep them safe. And that's just one example, but there's many such examples where people might have good intentions, but the policies they're putting forth don't impact them. And that's why, in many ways, politicians spending money is so dangerous because they don't really face the consequences for their actions. It's the everyday citizen, it's the lower and middle class, especially the lower class, who have to bear the force of inflation the most, not the politicians who are getting rich, insider trading the markets that they're legally allowed to insider trade for some reason. And their policies don't impact people. And then second, if that wasn't bad enough, it's also not their money they're spending. So, if someone gives me, my grandma gives me her credit card, like obviously I try to treat grandma's credit card right because it's my grandma and I love her. But the reality is it's much easier to spend someone else's money than myself. So in this example of my grandma giving me her credit card, you don't really think as much like, oh, my grandma said I could go buy lunch. I'm going to get the double meat from Chipotle. Whereas if I'm spending that money myself, I'm like, do I really need the double meat? Like, inflation's pretty tough right now. Whereas if it's someone else's card. So imagine that, except instead of like a $15, $20, $10 Chipotle bowl, it's like trillions of dollars a year because it's not the government's money, it's the taxpayers' money. And they don't even face the consequences for their actions. It's just this horribly misaligned set of incentives. And to make matters worse, no politician is getting elected on fiscal austerity. It doesn't matter if it's Kamala or Trump. They're both going to print money out of thin air with the Fed to keep financing the U.S. government. I mean, maybe Kamala prints more money because she just announced that idea to, I think, like give everyone $25,000. Their whatever, if they meet the requirements, she'll give them $25,000 for their mortgages. But the reality is, it doesn't matter if it's Trump or Kamala who gets in. They're both going to print a lot of money with the Fed to make sure they can spend said money, and that is not a good set of incentives. I'm passionate about Bitcoin, but even if you hate Bitcoin, like you probably want to save in things that can't be printed out of thin air by politicians: gold, houses, stocks. I wouldn't say bonds, but stocks, Bitcoin. It's just stuff that politicians can't print out of thin air because they can create as much money as they want essentially with a few keystroke clicks, which is baffling.
That kind of creates a question that I'm curious about, which is like, why do you think they don't, like, so we live in a society, right, where, like you said, they will take our taxes, they choose how they want to spend it. Do they want a double meatball at Chipotle but on a much, much larger level? Do they want, like, but we don't have any say whatsoever in where our money goes. And if we did, do you think things would be completely different, or do you think that it would still be swayed by the political narrative that's being pushed out?
I think it always will be impacted to some degree to the political narrative, but I think it's like a forcing function if you fix the money. I don't think Bitcoin's a panacea for all the world's problems. Humans, as great as humans are, human nature, we're still greedy, and we're still, we have our, it's a sinful world, and those problems don't go away if you fix the money. What I think it does is it eliminates politicians' ability to spend all this money out of thin air. Like, for example, I think when Kamala was in Georgia, she had that concert with Megan Thee Stallion and Quavo, and it came out, I haven't verified this, but people were claiming on Twitter that they paid Megan Thee Stallion and Quavo to be there. And it's like, where do they get, I think the number was 70,000 or something, I don't know exactly. I think Aiden Ross, some streamer, came up with that and said that. And again, I don't know how valid these claims are, but let's just assume that's true. Where are they getting $70,000 to pay influencers to come out to then like fill an arena so it can make it look like her rally is huge? Like, that's insane. Like, just throwing around like 70,000 is like a pretty decent salary in America for most people, and they're just throwing that so like celebrities can come to their concert and get people to come. And I think if you eliminate the government's ability to print money out of thin air, there is no way in hell we're sending all that money to Ukraine. There's no way in hell we're sending both the aid to Palestine, and then at the same time, sending bombs and military and money to Israel to bomb the Palestinians. I mean, it's like how much money are we wasting, giving Israel weapons and then also giving aid to Palestine? I mean, like, the whole thing is so ass backwards. And I think if you take away politicians' ability to print money out of thin air, and they had to go to the populace and say, hey, we're going to need to raise taxes by 5% because, we want to fund war in this other country. We want to go bomb people. It'd be like, no way in hell am I giving you a dime of my taxpayer money so you can go bomb children in the Middle East. Like, that is horrible. And I think it would just make it a lot harder and a lot less profitable for them to go to war. And I think it also incentivizes people to cut corners, because when they feel like they can't keep up and it's all pointless. You see a huge rise in nihilism, so people just think like, what's the point of this? Screw it, I'm not going to do as good of a job. I'm not going to give that quality service, whatever it is. Then they also just feel like, they're on a treadmill. It's getting faster and faster. And like, at what point do you just get off the treadmill and say, screw it, I give up. I'm done with this. And that's not what you want to see in society for, people to prosper. People don't feel like they can have kids. It's like, how am I ever going to afford a kid's education? And one of the reasons Bitcoin makes me so hopeful is because, like, I know for a fact my daughter, by the time she's 18, I don't know for a fact, but I feel like very, very confident that like any little amount of money I can put away today for her in Bitcoin is going to be worth many, many multiples of, what it was when I saved in it. And it's almost like an operating system upgrade with the way I look at money. And people shouldn't, a lot of people in Bitcoin talk about how if you live in this fiat system, you almost have to have two jobs, your day job and then become a professional investor. And like, very few people, it's a lot of zero-sum games, and very few people in finance make it because it's an incredibly cutthroat game. Like, as much as I, shit on TradFi bros, like, it is a very tough game, and it's a ton of competition, and the brightest minds in the world, many of them go into finance because the incentives are they can make a lot of money, but also because they want to exceed and they want that ruthless competition. And the reality, 99% of people are not good traders, and they're going to get wrecked. And they should simply be able to save in dollars and not have to think, what investment am I going to make to preserve my purchasing power? But the reality is, if they hold dollars, it's like holding a melting ice cube, and their purchasing power is constantly eating away from them. And they're constantly trying to figure out, on top of their full-time job, what should I invest in? And as if that wasn't already hard enough, if you can't, some of these people in TradFi are working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. Like, I think it was it got posted on Twitter, but it was from Reddit, just talking about the quality of life of people who are like at the bottom of the rungs at Goldman Sachs and how miserable their life is and just how much they have to work. So if that is what the reality is for people in finance, how the hell is someone who's working a 40 hours a week job as a nurse or as an oil field worker or as pick your profession, how are they supposed to compete with the people who are like slaving away 100 hours a week working in the upper echelons of finance to try and, whittle away something for retirement? No wonder so many people are pissed off and pointing fingers at the other side and so divisive. And that's why, having an asset like Bitcoin that I know is truly scarce. It's Econ 101. If something is truly scarce and the demand for that thing if the supply is not changing and the demand rises, well, the only thing that's likely to happen is the price, at least denominated in fiat terms, is going to keep going up. And there's a ton of FUD from the mainstream media. And I mean, Bitcoin is, it's like a famous quote. It's like everything you don't understand about computer science and everything you don't understand about finance wrapped into one, and that's Bitcoin. And of course, you still like listening to, I mean, even on Twitter or whatever social media platform, it's not like it's just the mainstream media, or I should say the legacy corporate media. There's so much FUD, so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt about Bitcoin, and it takes so many hours to study. And most people, they simply don't have the time or don't know what resources to look at or whatever it is. And I try and spread the message, and plenty of other people are too. And I mean, now there's more resources than ever, and that's great. But it really does feel like a monetary operating system upgrade when you can just put your savings in one thing and set and forget it and not have to worry about it. And that's what I try and tell people. Don't look at it don't look at Bitcoin necessarily as an investment. It's just a better savings technology. Put your money in this, zoom out, think long term, and it's going to 10, 100, if you can hold it long enough. It's hard to stomach the volatility, so that's why I think people should learn about Bitcoin before buying it, so you can stomach that volatility. So when you see it drop 50%, you don't immediately panic sell it. But if you study it, I think most people will come to the conclusion, oh man, Bitcoin's on sale, I should probably get more of it. And if you have that conviction, it really does feel like a monetary system upgrade. And to answer your earlier question, I think it would really prevent politicians from being able to send us to war and fund all this ridiculous stuff and pay off celebrities to attend their rallies or whatever ridiculous way they're spending taxpayer money.
I feel like you just basically made the case in point for like why people need to look at Bitcoin more, because like starting from what you first said, like I had no idea that Megan Thee Stallion was paid to be at Kamala's convention or like to do a concert, but also on top of that, that shows how fucked we are as a society.
Why, Chad? I'm gonna look that up just to make sure.
Yeah, look it up just to triple check. But like, if that's the case, that means that we are so money hungry and we are so decentralized to try and actually do something that's based on passion and that's based on actually wanting to help. Like, it's screwed up. And that's where hopefully Bitcoin, does it say?
It's saying she fires back Megan Thee Stallion. Let's see. Brings Fedora Blue Wave down with Megan Thee Stallion. Evidence, but there was no clear evidence
That she was
included.
paid.
I was like, it's just kind of sad that you see you see WAPO, Rolling Stone, and it's like, oh, what's she paid? Oh, that's dressed in
Which one's even accurate?
Essence. Megan Thee Stallion porns. Let's see. I guess we can ask Twitter. Megan Thee Stallion paid to be at Atlanta Kamala rally. Excuse my awful spelling. I like how they're putting the vote.gov.
Live into the galaxy of information.
She might have been there as an endorsement, which could come with various perks, not just direct payment, think exposure, political connections, or even support for her causes. Celebrities can be involved in ways that aren't just about cash. That's true. Believe it or not, well, this guy I know is a conservative, so I mean, it could be biased, but let's see. Two famous celebrities took the dirty money. Internet celebrity Quavo and Megan Thee Stallion. They showed up to endorse, but there was an insane mismatch, but a huge turnout, which only occurred because of the false celebrities. False one. Yeah, so due to the massive success, which accumulated over Kamala was exposed trying to pay influencers for their support. She reached out to Kai Cenat. Yes, I mean, obviously this guy is big Trump, dude. I don't know if
accurate or not. I mean, whether she did or didn't, it's just the idea and the overall like concept of we do live in a world where you have to pay to get support. And like if it was true where she did have to do that, then that's extremely sad, because that means our society is so not passionate about doing anything unless it involves getting paid. But also like to your point about to the people that can't invest in Bitcoin, or like that don't want to invest in Bitcoin because they don't know enough about it, and they're like struggling to make ends meet because they can't afford two jobs because they're working 80 hours a week and making $14,000 a year. It's like there's no education or ability, and it seems so daunting to put more money into investment when the government and taxes and all of these other resources are taking so much that they're left with like negative. And it's scary. So maybe you could provide some resources or like also advice on like how do people that are so stuck in their own finances and that are like struggling to make ends meet, how can they use Bitcoin as even just like a very small investment in a way that doesn't impact those things?
Yeah, and I'll caveat it by saying I work at a Bitcoin company, swan.com. So obviously I'm biased. It's not like I'm not biased. I'll put that out there. And I think, going back to the point about were they paid or not, it's kind of sad that like, you look at like the legacy media sources and it says it doesn't. And then you look at like a Twitter source and it's an individual. And he's like saying like, it's, of course they were paid. And I mean, honestly, I'm leaning towards believing the individual just because I have so much disdain for so many of the legacy corporate media outlets. But at the same time, either way, it's sad that it's very hard to find a definitive answer online. And I think it's a symptom of broken money. And the reality is, for people in the United States, we're incredibly lucky, because I think most of the quality Bitcoin signal is in English, just because, I mean, most finance around the world is done in English. It's, just because the United States has been the dominant power in the world, most content is in English. Now, I think AI is really helping that because it can, I mean, hell, I'm not going to do it, but maybe in the future, once they offer, because software just gets cheaper and cheaper, once there's free services out there, I'll dub this podcast in Spanish and, Chinese, Mandarin, whatever language people want to listen to it in. And then you can spread that signal far and wide. But I really think the best resource is, Twitter does have some good resources for Bitcoin, but, go on YouTube and like look up what Bitcoin did, the What is Money show, swan.com. We have a tab with a bunch of blogs, Bitcoin News, Bitcoin Magazine, and just learn about it. The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous. I got it over in the bookshelf somewhere. Also the Fiat Standard, Principles of Economics. And just like take the time to start researching, and everyone's going to have, a different, person they resonate with in the space. The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth. Reading this book right now. Jeff Booth is an amazing, if you just type in Jeff Booth on YouTube, he's got plenty of podcasts. But this book, Why Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future. And I'm only like one chapter in, but I've heard Jeff speak on this on many podcasts. And one of the points he made is if you look, like he was one of the first people to have a phone. And I mean, me and you were in diapers when, this type of phone was a thing. But he was saying he was one of the first people to have a phone, and he was very fortunate to grow up in an affluent Canadian neighborhood with pretty well-off parents. And he bought this like phone, and like, I forget what the amount was, but I want to say he spent like $4,000 like making calls with his buddies that first year. And like, this is like before all the insane inflation. So like, that is a lot of money at that time. Not that 4,000, I mean, it's still a decent size amount, but it's not what it was 30 years ago. And all that phone could do was call people. It couldn't text, couldn't order DoorDash to your thing. It wasn't a calculator, it wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't all the things our phone can do nowadays. It was simply a phone that could call other people, and not that many people had phones, so the network effect wasn't even as profound. You look at where that phone was 30 years ago and where we are today with, the iPhone in my pocket. I mean, what this thing can, this phone right here has more computing power than the people during, I think, whatever Apollo mission sent people to the moon. Like the mainframe computers in, the control room has less computing power than this little phone right here. And I mean, it's mind blowing how we have all this deflation in technology. And there's a great chart. I'll see if I can find it. I know I just wrote an article about it, so I know I have it somewhere. Yeah, here we go. And basically what this chart is showing is that every market the government gets into, they essentially absolutely destroy it. Was it this? Yeah, here we go. Let me just pull up the tweet from Dylan because it's so good. The contrasting forces of exponential technological advancement against perpetual monetary expansion. Meanwhile, tech continues to deliver more efficiency for less cost. And look at this chart. I mean, it's mind-boggling. So you look at like anything the government gets involved with, hospital services, highly regulated industry, most people buy healthcare through their work, college tuition and fees, the government subsidizes our loans. You want to get a business loan as a 18-year-old, good luck. But if you want to take out $200,000 to get an education, sign on the dotted line. By the way, you can't declare bankruptcy on that. College textbooks, medical stuff, average hourly wages, housing. The government's involved in the housing markets. The Federal Reserve is buying mortgage-backed securities. Food and beverages. There is a massive amount of subsidies for various foods, corn, whatever. I mean, we have so many subsidies. New cars. The government bailed out Ford and GM and some other companies. Clothing's pretty stagnant. But then look at technology. Cell phone services, toys, computer software, TVs. Now, obviously, the government is trying to get more and more involved in many of these fields, as we see with the censorship. But it's a pretty clear trend. It seems like the more government gets involved with market participants, the more the cost of those goods and services go up. Which you can see, technology is so deflationary. It's like you have this inflationary force of technology fighting this deflationary force. And while I do think Bitcoin is great, there are challenges if you're not in the developed world, which is kind of ironic, because you'd think, a lot of Bitcoiners do tout how much this is going to do for people in various places that aren't, the developed world. But the reality is, if you are in the developed world, we are so fortunate to have a little excess money to put it into Bitcoin and to saving that money. But I think it also goes back to that analogy of a rising tide lifts all ships. And if, we do see huge amounts of progress being made because we finally have a currency that people can't print out of thin air. There's a great Jeff Booth quote, the guy who wrote this book, The Price of Tomorrow. And it's like, when there is an abundance in the money, when there is an abundance of money, there is scarcity everywhere else. And when there is scarcity in money, there's abundance everywhere else. And the idea being is, if you can't just print money out of thin air and buy up the valuable goods and services that you want, you can't inflate the housing market. And again, I get why they do it, because the reality is that's where most Americans' wealth is. And the political pushback, if they tried to, let housing collapse, would just be, and suffer. Same with people's 401ks and all these things. But the sad part is, when they do that, it leads to, it just leads to all these market distortions and scarcity. And if you actually had money that couldn't be printed out of thin air, and people had to go out and provide value to earn said money because it couldn't be printed out of thin air, I think you would have a lot more abundance. You'd have a lot more goods and services being created. You'd have a lot more creative destruction. So yeah, sure, your house price might, drop 50%. But at the same time, I think we would have so much more abundance in the world because, founders would be going out there and trying to provide more value to others rather than siphon wealth via aligning themselves close to politicians and the quote-unquote money printer.
Well, even the education around it too. Right now, I don't know about you, but for me in high school, I didn't even have economics education. My economics education was Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, and that it's a great book, but did I learn about how to do my taxes? No. Did I learn that the government owns a bunch of housing? No. I didn't learn about saving, investing, any of that. So it's like, we now live in a world where it's like education comes in aftermath. And what's funny too is, like you said, like, there will be huge loans of $200,000 given to help promote education, and yet, like, we're not even teaching about what that means. Like, do you understand? The majority of people probably don't understand that that's going to haunt them for the rest of their lives. Like, that loan that they took out to be able to understand what's going on and reteach themselves the things that public education may not have covered, depending on their state. Like, it's now putting them in a hole for the rest of their lives, and they're still not even being taught. Like, if they were taught about Bitcoin, or if we were teaching youth about, like, wait, there's an alternative. There are different ways for parents to save up for their kids, like you're doing for, like, your baby, and just different types of alternative routes that, again, there's zero education about, and yet
they'll guarantee that loan, and I don't think that just writing everyone's loans off is the answer either, because that's just going to create way more inflation, and it's very unfair to the person who decided to become a plumber or go work in a trade, to pay for, those taxpayers have to pay for the people who did have the chance to get a college education. But at the same time, to your point, I don't think many people understood that when you sign here, you can't declare bankruptcy on this loan. You're putting yourself in a huge hole. And you do see horror stories where people are like, I paid back in terms of what the principal of that loan was. I paid it back, but I barely made a dent in the actual principal because it's all gone to interest. And I think so few people understand that. And I do think part of the reason, I'm kind of for just abolishing the Department of Education. Because I heard a crazy stat. It was like the more they spend, the worse off students' outcomes are. And New York was one of like the pivotal examples. I think they spend like 40,000 per year on kids, and they have some of the worst test scores in the nation. Like, imagine if they just gave the kid 40,000 and they put that in, I don't know, a stock index that, you know, accrued 5 to 7% a year. By the time that kid was 18, you know, he would have quite a chunk of change there. And instead, they, you know, give it to bureaucrats and the administrative state, who in many cases just siphon wealth, don't actually, clearly are not helping these kids get better test scores and learn better. And going back to the deflationary point about technology, you know, I've been trying to learn how to code, and there's a great course called 100 Days of Code by Replit. And after I, you know, think through the problem, get a code solution, or if I'm struggling with it, I'll open ChatGPT or Claude, which is just another LLM by Anthropic, you know, an AI you can talk to. And it's like having a person, I mean, it's like having like a professional developer there to walk me through every line of code, to explain any questions I might have. Doesn't get tired, doesn't have to go to the bathroom. It's like having a personal tutor I can talk with. And you think about, like, I think there's a lot of good teachers out there. Like, imagine, you know, I have a 1-year-old, and it's hard enough with just a 1-year-old trying to get her to focus and do this and that. I can only imagine what it's like with like a bunch of 5 to 15 or 5 to 18-year-olds trying to teach 20 of them about a topic, whether it's math or history or whatever it is, trying to get them to focus. I mean, every child is different. And I think now that we have these tools, I mean, the danger is like people bias these models and get these models to teach kids incorrect information. But for math and for kind of the things that, you know, I think it's a little harder to corrupt math, if you will, than history. Obviously, it's much easier to lie about history than it is, I guess, math per se or physics. But if you have a model where they can just talk to back and forth and learn that way, I mean, that makes the cost of an education so much less. And you think, what is making college prices rise 184% according to this chart, college tuition and fees, since 2000? I mean, it's almost 200x since 2000. So, like, you know, 25 odd years ago. I think part of it is because these administrators realize, like, hey, as long as we cozy up to the state and, you know, we're allowed to be a university, the state's going to guarantee these loans. So who is the incentive to please? The student who they're trying to educate, or the state? And obviously, colleges aren't going to destroy their own business model. But if you allow people to use these AI models, and I mean, between YouTube and ChatGPT and all the resources out there, if you really have an incentive to learn something, you can. But you see, so like the other reality is, like, I love my job and I'm so grateful for it. But what I learned in college, for the most part, I mean, some of my entrepreneurship classes, I guess, did apply. But for the most part, most of what I learned in college did not apply to what I'm doing today. And I know I'm not special in that. Most people are the same way. What they learn in college has nothing to do with their day job. But the reality is, there's no way I could have gotten my job without that piece of paper that says, you know, I have a Bachelor of Arts from Tufts University. So I don't know the solution, but I think it is a good trend that credentialism is kind of going away. And I think by the time my daughter turns 18, maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect that it'll be much more of like, well, what's your proof of work? What can you show me you've done online? Have you built a following? Have you built websites? Have you, you know, say she goes to film, right? Have you made films? Like, show me that. I'm not so worried about your piece of paper anymore. And I think in the, you know, kind of time we grew up in, you did need that piece of paper if you wanted to get certain jobs. Certain jobs or opportunities would simply not be available to people unless they had that Bachelor's of Arts or Master's of Business Administration or whatever it is. I mean, the various fields. But I think we're going to see, so, you know, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And obviously these are complex systems with a lot of variables, but I do suspect that universities in the coming 20 years are really going to struggle to keep up with the pace of these tools. And while they rely on credentialism, I think more and more businesses, people, organizations are going to start to be like, no, I just want to see what work you've done. I don't care if you have a piece of paper from a university that says you graduated, when the reality is this job has nothing to do with what you studied, which is not the case for every field, but it's that way for many, many fields.
No, I mean, it's really interesting because you make a good point that also, though, can be detrimental to a lot of people as well, where it's like, it's so good now that we as a society have started to create so many more opportunities for creating income and for educating ourselves and for finding things that are more helpful in day-to-day life. But then also there are, for example, like in a nonprofit that I work with, like there are a lot of low-income individuals who are never able to afford an education, or maybe just immigrated over from a different area or are refugees, and the immediate thing that comes is like predatory lenders who create this idea of, no, here's like $2,000, you don't need anything, you don't need any qualification, but like here's the $2,000 which with an 138 interest. So it's like those people also, because they're not educated about it, like, and because that whole component of like understanding the world isn't there, which again, college didn't teach as well, unless like you had chosen to take a special course in economics, which you don't have to in a lot of colleges. But it's like, I don't know, this like continual perpetuating problem of like, if, without an education you can still make a lot of income, but also when you're uneducated and you're experiencing it for the first time, and you have banks saying, hey, like, here's that $3,000 that you really needed to pay your rent, but just know you're gonna owe back 30,000. It's like, how do you win?
What those predatory lending practices remind me of? Exactly like the hospitals, where like rather than finding the underlying root cause, they want the people to keep coming back, so they just put a band-aid on it. And you've seen, like, I don't know if you know what Klarna or Afterpay or some of these companies where it's like buy now pay later type things. And let's be real, no one reads the fine print. They click through that shit. I mean, South Park had a hilarious episode about that, where like Kyle and a few other people were the few people who didn't read the new terms of service and accepted it, and then they became like the human centipede or whatever. Because I don't know if you've seen that episode, but basically in the terms of service, it said if you accept this, then you're gonna have to, become this monstrosity. And it's a hilarious South Park episode. There's a lot of truth in that nugget, which is no one reads the terms of service and no one knows what's in them. And these Klarna Afterpay solutions might seem great in the short term, but like and credit card companies are just as guilty too. Like the interest rates on these things are so ridiculous that if you make the payments on time, I guess it can be a good tool. But the reality is most people are not very good with managing their finances. And it's not to say we should bail them out, because that is not what I'm advocating for. But it is sad that these like band-aid solutions ultimately just make the problem worse in the long run. But rather than businesses, I mean, that's like such a perfect example of the fiat Keynesian economic system that we live in. Rather than like trying to help people, we essentially we put these band-aids that just make the issues even worse, that are short-term solutions. But I mean, that's what you saw, the 2008 financial crisis. Like, I think Iceland was like the one country that jailed their bankers, and all these other places, like some of these bankers got raises and the government just bailed them out. And I know that's what the incentives of the system pushed them towards, because it's like, what do you want to let the housing market collapse, and then there's all this civil unrest and people's like just completely wiped out, and the depression we would have had, I'm sure, probably would have been just as bad, if not worse, than the Great Depression of the 1930s, which we've read about. But at the same time, it's like, well, what'd they do? They just created a shit ton of moral hazard. They basically rewarded many of these bankers. They bailed out the big banks and said they're too big to fail. So now we have these like systemically important banks that like they simply will not let fail. And I think a lot. We were so young at that time, but I've heard, like, I think it was like the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Like, they both like kind of had an idea like who was the enemies. But then it became like, it was like the classic divide and conquer. It's like, no, those guys are the enemies, and then left and right starts fighting. And it was like, well, what just happened to the bankers who just made out like absolute bandits and got bailed out for their mistakes? For packaging these mortgage-backed securities, telling people that it's totally fine, there's nothing wrong with these assets, and then the bottom just dropped out, and now we find ourselves where we're here today. And that's why I always say I think Bitcoin is so important. And I just encourage people to learn about it, because a lot of the economics they teach in college is like Keynesian economics. And I mean, I'm biased. I'm an Austrian economist. I would subscribe. I'm not really an Austrian economist. I'm not an economist, but I would subscribe more to the Austrian school of thought. And if I had to describe the difference between Keynesian economics and Austrian economics, it's that Keynesians think the government's ability to control, to have a monopoly on capital is an atrocity, whereas Keynesians seem to think that's like a feature of the system. So like Austrians think that's a huge bug in the system, and Keynesians think that it's a feature in the system, and you have to have an entity with a monopoly on capital. And I would argue that's just not true at all. Having an entity with a monopoly on capital, so what it costs to borrow and lend money, is a horrible idea, and basically just leads to this current system where you don't really have capitalism, but instead you have crony capitalism, because some person can print money out of thin air and pay off whoever they want.
literally pay off. And like you said, also with the terms and agreements, I mean, like a great example that's currently happening now, that's a real world example, is the Disney Plus scandal. Have you
Oh,
heard about
yeah. So keep talking about it. I think I did see something about this, which is
it? You
so
pull it
insane.
up. It's basically this man's,
Family can't sue, right? Something like that.
yeah, she had severe allergies. She was a doctor, a very, it seemed like, smart and incredible woman, and she went to a Disney World Resort restaurant, specified, hey, like, I need to make sure this is allergen free. They did not give her allergen free food. She ended up dying later that
Oh,
day. And when he tried to sue Disney, they basically said, nope, sorry, you waived your rights to sue us the second that you signed up for a free trial. Free trial. Not actually subscribing, a free trial to Disney Plus. So anyone that is subscribed to Disney Plus, I can also tell you HBO Max has it. You can't sue them. You are legally, the second that you clicked I agree, you can't sue anyone anymore. And it's only for $50,000, which is a penny to Disney. Literally a penny. But they're saying no,
oh
which
my
is,
gosh.
yeah.
I bet it's not fine. It's so tragic, but I mean, you can't almost help but just like laugh at like the ridiculousness of it. And sad part
Yeah.
too is like I don't know how well off this family is, but I know lawyers are not cheap in trying to sue a behemoth like Disney. And I saw the most messed up meme, and it was like, hey, if you're a politician and like you're going to be caught with underage children, just make sure you're playing Disney music. So Disney IP lawyers will sue you to take down the. So if it ever gets posted on the internet, Disney IP lawyers will come after you. It's like, God, that's so dark and like, what a perfect example of like. I think it was that meme that then like, or it might have been. I saw this on Twitter and like that meme was posted under whatever tweet. But God, like that. That is that's so wild. And I know Disney's not the only one. I went to a AI meetup, openness and AI meetup, and we're having really interesting conversations about how basically training these models. They train on mass amounts of data, and the guy there who's giving the talk was, and I would agree with him. We should open source more of the AI. But one of the points I had never thought about was that if you open source how you essentially get this data, then anyone who's suing you, so for example, ChatGPT, I'm pretty sure is being sued by the New York Times. I know they were. I don't know. I highly doubt it's been resolved because lawyers don't, or I guess cases don't seem to get resolved very fast. But the New York Times is suing ChatGPT, claiming ChatGPT trained on the New York Times data. And I mean, hell, they probably did. I think most AIs do, scrape whatever data they can from the internet. But if you open source all that data, then it just makes the New York Times case or any other case like that much stronger for the people if it is found that they did train on your data. And it's like a huge gray area. And on the one hand, I mean, I hope more companies open source it. I think Meta with their Llama model open sourced a lot of it. But even then, it's not really perfect. And like all the data you train on, if you do open source that and then someone says, no, you weren't allowed to train on that data and because it was open source, it could potentially make you liable. So it's like this cat and mouse game where I think open AI should be more open source, so people should be able to adjust the weights and parameters and train these models to run on their local machine rather than having to use Claude or ChatGPT servers. But I understand the reality of it as well as some of these companies just don't want to get sued, and a lot of them are just completely ruthless with the data scraping because they want the best model. Understandably, they want their model to be the smartest. So I don't really know the answer, but it's just kind of a fascinating thought experiment. At what point is that someone's IP? Is it not someone's IP? The model is, able to generate that output in part because of that, but it's also a new output, especially, if I sit there and I type an essay and I just like stream of consciousness, spit out like a pretty not great essay, but like at least it has my point in it. And then I'm like, hey, ChatGPT, please improve this article. Make sure you're like the world's best journalist and that you write the most compelling article and you make it funny and you get my point across better and you give better analogies. And I just write this awesome prompt, paste in the article I wrote, and then it pulls from all these other articles, different parts, and like, oh, wow, so funny how that guy wrote this, and like that's a great way. Let me put it in this article. It's like a new creation, right? It's like parody law. You take like Weird Al Yankovic never got sued because of parody law and the fact that like he would take a pop song, but then he would parody it. So I feel like in a way an AI is almost like that, where it's like it doesn't take the exact thing, and even if there's not humor injected, it's like it is a new thing, but it's also are you stealing someone's work? It's very unclear, and I know a lot of artists are gonna be profoundly impacted by these tools.
No, big time impacted because you upload any type of art and you're like, hey, can you help me modify this one thing? There's an app called PixArt, for example, or Photoshop, Adobe Photoshop. The second that you use that AI generator feature where like you can go and select a part of your picture that you need to edit, put in new stuff, whatever, that AI has full like
License to train on that. Zoom's doing the
yeah.
same thing. Yeah, Zoom's doing the same thing for all your video calls, unless you opt out. And I think the only way to opt out is if you buy like a premium membership and negotiate with them. Yeah, all these companies are like ruthlessly trying to train on as much data as possible. I mean, I haven't read the Gmail terms of service, but I'm pretty sure it's the same thing. They train on all your Google Drive, they train on all your emails, they train their models on all this stuff. And on the one hand, I mean, I guess we're getting value from it in the sense I use these models and I love them and they're great and they help me with a lot of my stuff. But it's like, yeah, that is kind of a messed up. You're taking our data and training your models on it, especially if you're an artist just trying to like adjust something, tweak it a bit. But all of these companies have AI strategies, and I think this problem's only going to get, I don't want to say worse, but it's only going to become a bigger issue. And I also suspect that as some of these cases start getting settled, AI is going to be so much farther along that the ruling might not even necessarily make sense in the context of where AI is already gone. Like, for example, Twitter obviously trains, or I should say XAI, which is like just a sub company of X. I don't know how the corporate structure works, but essentially XAI uses X, formerly Twitter, to train their model. And say I post like a song on Twitter, like all of the lyrics because I like it. Well, I mean, I'm allowed to tweet out lyric songs because I like it, but like now, can X train on that tweet? I mean, the answer is yes, they're going to train on that tweet. But if that song is copyright, it's just like a huge legal gray area. And, I mean, maybe if a big account tweeted out a song like that, they'd get mad, but like my account probably not going to get flagged for that. But they could still train on my account. So it's just very interesting to think through the implications of our data and just how it's being used in so many ways.
I'm very curious to see how it continues to unfold. That was like how recently also there were these hackers. I'm not sure if it was true or not, and like that's where we'll need to research, but hacking into every American social security number.
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
If that actually happened, we're just testing out now how data can be breached, how there's zero ownership, and how nothing that you have is actually safe. Um, it's very interesting.
Hackers may have stolen the social security numbers of every American. I saw someone on Twitter talking about this, and they were saying that they suspect this will be used to justify whatever the next, or to usher in a digital ID to basically, people, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. There's no way. It's like, well, man, there were a lot of conspiracy theories that came true during COVID. The famous joke was like, what's the difference between the truth and a conspiracy theory? About 6 months.
About 6 months, yeah.
Man, I hope I'm wrong on that, but like, what a perfect storm to like push in a digital ID. Well, this is for your safety, for your protection. I mean, we can't have you scrolling online without a digital ID because what if someone hacks you? You can't keep our data safe anyway, so what makes you think a digital ID is going to be that much safer?
Exactly. We just got hacked. Surprise. Like, we keep getting hacked every day. Major companies that are supposed to be keeping our data safe are getting hacked. So it's like...
Yep. Well, I'll say this is almost at the hour and a half mark, and I want to be respectful of your time. But I think it's good to end on a positive note, so I'll go real quick. Something that makes me so bullish, and it kind of relates to what we just saw with the social security thing, which is not bullish, but technologies like Nostr, where you have a public-private key pair, and where any node I sign on the platform, people can be sure it's coming from me, as long as I keep my private key safe, because I use the private key to sign it, and no AI can fake that, no AI can generate that. Whereas, the reality is, I mean, we know Biden's press secretary runs his account. So the fact that that's how he announced his resignation, it's like, did someone run a coup on the current president? Did someone push him out? There's also a Twitter employee somewhere, an ex-employee, I should say, who has root access to the server and could make that tweet. Now, I don't suspect that was the case this time, but it is kind of crazy to think in the back of your head, like, man, there's a Twitter employee out there who has root access to that server. It could go on anyone's Twitter account. I mean, he could go on Putin's Twitter account and be like, we're nuking Ukraine. And instead, I mean, again, I don't think it's going to happen for obvious reasons, but without a public-private key pair, And these social media companies, I mean, the same goes for Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Whoever has root access to those servers can basically go on any platform and post anything on behalf of these people. Now they don't, because I mean, governments and I mean, the crackdown on them would be horrible. But I do think a platform like Nostr, where it's all public-private key pairs, where you can take someone's public key and look at what their feed is, get different perspectives. You can zap people, so you can send Bitcoin back and forth if they put a Lightning address in their Nostr profile, and you can be confident that as long as they have, they're smart with their digital footprint and they keep their private key secure, that note they post on Nostr, which stands for notes and other stuff transmitted by relay, is theirs. And then finally, it's censorship resistant. So if someone kicks me off their relay, well, I can run my own, or I can subscribe to a bunch of different relays. So it's like a what's the beast with multiple heads? I'm forgetting what that's called.
No, not
Kraken,
that.
I think maybe. I don't know if it's Kraken. Whatever. Like a Hydra. It's like a Hydra. You cut off one head, but it's got like 7 others, and that's beautiful. I think no censorship. You can send Bitcoin without permission to anyone. No middlemen. It gets not that all advertisers are bad, but gets the advertisers out of it. You can be sure that it's them because no AI can hack I shouldn't say no AI can hack private key. No one can brute force and steal someone's private key as long as they keep it secure. And I mean, just like that being able to send Bitcoin back and forth, I think is so underrated. So super bullish on Nostr and what it means for humanity. And I hope more people, on top of learning about Bitcoin, will be compelled to go learn about Nostr. And it's just, man, it's an amazing and powerful tool.
Now I'm compelled to go and learn about it. So
I'll find some resources and link them in the show notes. And my favorite on the iPhone is the Damus client. There's many different clients, and by client, you basically think of a client as like the application you use to interact with the protocol. But Damus for iPhone is my favorite. Here on Android, I hear Amethyst is good. I don't have an Android, so I haven't used that, but I hear Amethyst is good. And then on my work computer, or I should say like my personal computer, any laptop, desktop, etc., primal.net is one of my favorite. And Primal also has an Android and iPhone app, but I like Damus on the iPhone, primal.net on the computer, and then I hear Amethyst is good for Android.
all right, I'm going to be testing this out as soon as we're off and try and figure it all out.
Hell yeah, I'll send you my NPub. My NPub is in my Twitter bio, so if anyone wants to follow me, my caption on Nostr or my bio is professional shitposter, and my title is Ben Mucker, or my name. Because I literally just whenever I find a funny meme, I'll screenshot it. I mean, occasionally I'll make my own, but for the most part, I see a funny meme, I'll screen grab it, I'll put it on Nostr, and it blows my mind that people have sent me actual Bitcoins, small and not like whole Bitcoins, but like they've sent me, I think I've earned probably 100,000 Satoshis, somewhere in that ballpark, which as of today, I think 100,000 Satoshis is only worth about $60. Like that blows my mind, just like sharing funny memes. I've earned the equivalent of $60, and if Bitcoin does what I think it's going to do, 100,000 Satoshis could be worth 6,000, 60,000. I mean, as long as they can print money out of thin air, there is no top to Bitcoin as long as there's no bottom to fiat, and there is no bottom to fiat. So I highly encourage people to learn about Nostr, and not just for the Bitcoin, but because it's censorship resistant. No one can censor you. No one can take away your ability to speak freely. It's how the internet should be, and the internet's centralized so much to these massive platforms. So I'm very bullish on platforms that decentralize it, but also be patient with Nostr because as much as I will shit on centralized platforms, the reality is they can provide a much better user interface and user experience because they have massive amounts of money and they have, basically massive teams that are basically making sure that you're as addicted to possible as their algorithms, as addicted as possible to using their platforms via their algorithms. But then they also have teams making sure everything's running smoothly. And the devs of Nostr are super impressive and great, but it's just so small and nascent at this time. And I think it's growing fast. But because it's small and nascent and decentralized, it's a very niche community, and it does not. I don't want to say it doesn't work as well with these centralized tools, but you'll see. It's like mind blowing how different it is without an algorithm. It feels like the early Twitter days, like when you actually saw your fringe tweets, and now Twitter is like you mostly get push tweets via an algorithm rather than actually seeing the tweets of people you follow.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's probably because everyone's so visual now, so it's like, oh, if it doesn't look perfectly clean, like TikTok and Instagram, then it's so much less compelling. But if you start to probably get into it where it's that type of non-algorithm that allows you to really just see everything, I feel like information would be so much less biased as well.
Yeah, you'll see it. It's just like it's almost like it's a surreal experience scrolling a feed that's not so heavily manipulated by algorithms. And you can curate who you follow, but it's like it. In a way, it's refreshing, and in another way, it's less satisfying or less. I shouldn't say less satisfying, less addicting because on like X or TikTok, I mean TikTok really, I don't even use it because I'm scared of the algorithm because I know it's so good. Like you don't, some of these other ones you have to like stuff and like the likes serve to influence the algorithm to help select what it should show you. TikTok, you don't have to do any of that. You just start using the app immediately. It will track your eyes. It'll figure out exact how long you stayed on the video. And TikTok seems to be the best at using the algorithm to figure out exactly what's compelling to you and then hooking you in. Not that the other platforms don't do it. I just don't think X, Facebook, Instagram, Reels, YouTube Shorts, any of them have perfected the algorithm as much as TikTok has perfected their algorithm.
No, it's beyond like their algorithm is almost perfect for like brand or consumer base type of creation. I mean, in terms of actually being good for society, it's horrific, but it's very incredible how they really have been able to do that. And it's the eye tracking, the seconds that you watch, the amount that you'll press on your phone or like scroll up for 1 second, scroll back down onto a video. Like it's weird. It's but good.
Yeah. Well, give me something bullish, not something so Black Mirror-ish.
Something so Black Mirror-ish. What is something bullish for today? Mm, hmm. I don't know. This just threw me on such a loop.
I
I'm
didn't mean to put
trying.
you on the spot, but we got to end on a positive note. We can't end on TikTok has us all hooked, and they're gonna keep our children addicted to scrolling little dopamine addicts.
Like just stop. Well, one good thing that does I feel like push some bullishness just on the terms of the algorithm and TikTok's like just detail to what you're seeing is that like there is ways to program the algorithm for your favor and in a way that can help you learn. And so that is something that like I've been doing myself that makes me really happy where it's like okay, I've now learned how to hack the algorithm into a way where like on my separate TikTok cuz I have two. I have my main account that I use to push out videos, then I have my other account that I use to watch videos. And like for the one that I use to watch, I've now been able to generate so that it's only non-biased philosophy videos, psychology videos. Like I try to stay away from news on TikTok because the majority of the time it's gonna be biased. But like I feel like that is one good thing is that there's hope for all of us where like you can overpower the things that overpower you now.
I think that is such a good point. Before I hop off here, I want to read this thing I found. But curating your content to really be thoughtful about what you're seeing and understanding how powerful these algorithms are, so using them as a tool. I remember a bunch of people talking about how like in China, TikTok only shows like educational videos and this and that. Like meanwhile in the States, it's like showing videos of people like eating out of a toilet and like becomes a viral challenge. And being very conscious of how you curate your feed and trying to stay away from the things that upset you or really make just put you in a bad headspace. And George Mack wrote this, and it's basically like, imagine the news is a person talking to you, right? So it says, news, hey, do you want to see this footage of a school shooting? Person, no. News, guess how many people have died in this recent earthquake? Person, no, please stop. News, North Korea has upgraded its nuclear missiles. Here's a video of how fast they could reach your family's house. Person, why are you focusing on the world's worst events? News, because I care about the truth. Person, if you care about these issues, what proactive solutions do you have? News, let me call two of the angriest people I know on the topic and give them 5 minutes to talk to each other. Person, why don't you pick two rational experts and we will hear both sides for 3 hours? News, nah, if we do that, I won't have time to sell you these pharmaceutical pills. Person, I think you're a toxic sociopath. News, no, I just care about the truth unless I have to analyze the truth of my past updates. It's like, what a profound way to like look at it. And I think that is such a good point you make about really being thoughtful in how you curate the content you look at online, because it'll have a huge impact on your psyche and just the way you look at the world.
Can you send me that? That was so good.
Yeah, I will. I will.
That was a great way to like come to a conclusion on this because it's You really do have to look at the news as if it is a person, like as if it's talking to you. You personify it, and then you're like, well, shit, like that's really what it's doing.
I mean, think about all the people who are like, you tell them you don't watch like, you don't watch the news. Excuse me? Like, why not? Like, do you like being ignorant? It's like,
Yeah.
excuse me, do I like being? Look at what they're feeding you. If anything, they're making you more ignorant. And for all the problems of COVID, that was, I think, one of the biggest silver linings of the whole thing. Is more and more people are waking up, seeing how biased the legacy corporate media is. And again, it's not like social media is by any means perfect, but at least you can hear a variety of takes. You can get people's individual perspectives, rather than a news that if it was a person, it would literally be a toxic sociopath that nobody would hang out with.
It's true. It's super true though. And when you put it that way, it's like makes you take a step back and be like, what am I actually feeding into?
100%. Yeah. And they'll tell you not to save in Bitcoin. So to wrap it all up, be thoughtful in your content curation and what you expose yourself to on these platforms. Save and sound money. So really learn about Bitcoin. And I shouldn't say save and sound money, just save in assets that the government can't print out of thin air. And get multiple perspectives, because I mean, at the end of the day, we're all biased. I mean, I literally work for a Bitcoin company, so I'm not gonna try and hide that fact. And also, Raja is an amazing cat, so we'll end it there. Thank you for all the listeners. Thanks, Ariel, for taking the time to join me, and we got to do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. This was a great discussion.